بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Welcome everybody to another program from Insta Ahlul Bayt and the Muslim Counsellor. My name is Berak Hussain. I'm a registered psychotherapist in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you very much for joining us today. And today, myself and sister Anisa Diab are going to be exploring this fascinating topic on Ask a Therapist, Let's Talk Narcissism. Assalamu alaikum, dear Anisa. Thank you for joining us. You can hear me clearly? It's always when we get started with these programs, a little bit of technicalities until it's all good. So we'll also slowly wait for people to join us, inshallah, while we begin our program. Salam, Sister Anisa, can you hear me?
Walaikum.
Walaikum salam. You're all good? You can hear me? You can hear me well?
You're breaking up first. Alaikum assalam. You're breaking up a little bit on this end, on the Instagram end.
All right. So we're good here, inshallah, both YouTube as well as Facebook. Alhamdulillah, it's all good and going. So we're just waiting for our respected viewers and participants to join us in this conversation today that we are going to take a look at around narcissism and what does it mean to be a narcissist and what are the traits of a narcissist and what does it mean to be perhaps married to one or to live with one, to work with one, or to just be around them, narcissists in general. And sometimes you are not even aware that you could be connected to a narcissist. So it's really important, I think, to understand this topic. And when we put this information out for the poster, mashallah, a lot of people started sending in messages to both the sister and I, wanting to learn more about this and sharing their personal experiences. I think that it's quite something that can really deter people and is a dangerous character trait to have that can really hurt a lot of people. So I'm just waiting here for the sister to make sure she is up and running here. Always the technical issues. We're not in Lebanon. We're in the States and here in Canada, but I'll just give it a minute or so. So for those of you who have joined, please do send us questions, comments, or concerns that you do have around this topic, and we'll do our best, inshallah, to do that. All right. Assalamu alaikum, sister. Can you hear me? You good now? Can you hear me? Sister Anisa? Can we have a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad so we can get the barakah here?
The Instagram is not going through.
Can you put it, can you leave the Wi-Fi and just put it on regular internet? Okay, are you there now, sister? You can hear me?
I can hear you through here. I'm not hearing you through the phone, but.
Okay, because it will echo off if we have that on.
Right.
I think everybody's hearing the echo more than the program right now.
All right.
Khair, inshallah. Can you hear me, sister? I think we've got the connection going now. Sister, I can hear you. If you speak, I can hear you. So I'll just begin talking while the sister, inshallah, gets herself reconnected. When we talk about narcissism, I think a lot of people may have different ideas around it, or even the wrong idea around what it is. So essentially, narcissism is the pursuit of gratification from vanity or egotistical admiration of one's idealized self-image and attributes. The term originated from Greek mythology, where the young Narcissus fell in love with his own image that was reflected in a pool of water. So some of the traits of a narcissist could include grandiose sense of self-importance, lives in a fantasy world that supports their delusions of grandeur, needs constant praise and admiration, and a sense of entitlement, and also exploits others without guilt or shame, and at times even deliberately harming other people. The narcissist's traits also include the ability, or rather frequently demeaning, intimidating, bullying, slandering, harassing, as well as belittling others. Earlier, we had a program on racism where we did explore that character trait as part of the racists. And you could say that somebody who's a narcissist could also potentially exhibit character traits related to a racist as well. So, Sister Anisa, are we good now? I cannot hear you, sister. Do you want to unmute your mic, please?
Yeah, I'm saying the Instagram doesn't seem to be cooperating with me, but I mean, I can hear you and see you fine on the StreamYard.
The StreamYard is good. Okay, but Instagram is not working, huh?
Yeah, and I think it's connection issue on my end, unfortunately. So do we want to, it's hard. I know I don't want to forego Instagram, but
okay. So maybe what we could do here is we can try to get Instagram going as we're talking. If it's not working, right now I put my sound high on my microphone, so perhaps our Instagram viewers can hear that. Can I just get a thumbs up from Instagram viewers? Otherwise, what I would suggest for Instagram viewers, if you can just go to the Muslim Counsellor YouTube page, sorry, the Muslim Counsellor, YouTube, as well as the Muslim Counsellor Facebook page. It's working fine over there. I think, I think it's, people can hear and see us clearly over there. We'll keep trying here at our end to get that going. Now, sister, I'm just trying to get other speakers here in case. Okay, so we've already done the introduction in terms of what is a narcissist potentially, and what are some of the character traits of a narcissist. So it'd be really great if you can give a little bit of an intro, Sister Anisa, in terms of what your thoughts are around a narcissist. And for those who don't know, Sister Anisa Diab is a mental health counselor. She does private counseling, which you can access. For those of you who are asking me, who can I go to talk to if I want to talk to you, I would refer you to Sister Anisa and other Muslim counselors that I know as well. So she's an amazing speaker as well. I've had the opportunity and pleasure and honor to work with her met her last year. We become good friends as well. And we're the type of people, sisters lifting sisters and supporting each other, especially in the work that we do, because we need more people within our communities, inshallah, to delve into these studies of mental health and psychology to help people and destigmatize mental health within our communities and make it the norm, so to speak, so that people can have access to mental health support and get the help that they need to process, to work through, and inshallah get the support that they need. So for those of you on Instagram, the sister's going to keep trying to get in. It looks like she's in Lebanon again, like our sister a few weeks ago. But at this point, we've got Facebook and YouTube. So Instagrammers, if you want the whole experience to see the sister clearly, we've got cool graphics over there as well. Join us on the Facebook for the Muslim Counsellor and the YouTube, then you can join us fully there. Alhamdulillah, thank you, Sister Fatima, for letting us know that Facebook is good. Khair, inshallah. So, sister, please, we'd love to hear from you in terms of your thoughts and experiences and ideas around what you'd like people to know about narcissism before we get to the Q&A.
Sure. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum everyone, and my dear sister Berak is just so kind and with her undeserved praise, and I really have appreciated, alhamdulillah, the sisterhood that we've had and the ability for us to get together and talk about issues that are uncomfortable many a time and often misunderstood. And so today we're talking about defining narcissism, what it's all about, how do you deal with somebody who has narcissistic behavior, how can you help your children. Just to give a little introduction, first of all, I would say that this word narcissism has become a very vogue term, especially when it comes to dealing with an ex-partner. We tend to label that person as they're a narcissist, or just describing this millennial generation as a whole, where we see a lot of selfie taking, social media being a primary focus. So many people tend to think that narcissism is on the rise, when in reality most children and teens and young adults have been for just developmentally more preoccupied with themselves. So what I want us to understand today is that while a lot of people may have narcissistic tendencies or be self-centered or very boastful in their accomplishments, narcissistic personality disorder is actually a very serious disorder and an issue, and it requires specific criteria actually to diagnose it. So, when a clinician is looking at whether or not a person has narcissistic personality disorder, they're looking at at least 5 of these different criteria to diagnose them. Either they're preoccupied with fantasies, unlimited success, beauty, power. They believe they're special, they're unique, and they should only associate with other high status, special people. They require excessive admiration. There's a sense of entitlement. They tend to be taking advantage of other people and exploitive with others that they're with. They lack a capacity for empathy. That's a big one. They will often talk about how others are envious of them, and how they just are not willing to identify with the needs or the feelings of those people or other people. And they show arrogance, they show haughty behaviors or attitudes. So you'll know if you are around somebody like this, because you will not be able to stand even being in the same room as them. At the same time, many a time they are charismatic in the way that they talk and approach people, and so oftentimes in public they may seem to be very confident, unique, have a way with words with others. But when it comes to their personal relationships, especially at their marriages, their relationships with their kids, it's just really falling apart at home. So the Quran talks specifically about the importance of avoiding arrogance. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 17, verse 37, ولا تمشي في الأرض مرحا إنك لن تخرق الأرض ولن تبلغ الجبال طولا. So don't walk on the earth exultantly. Indeed, you will never tear the earth apart, and you will never reach the mountains in height. So it's really important to always keep ourselves in check, with our arrogance. If somebody does, have narcissistic tendencies, to give them constructive feedback in a positive way, to encourage them to get some help. And we'll talk about what that help looks like, inshallah.
Inshallah. And it's you hit upon all the main points to begin the conversation around understanding what narcissism is all about, but people who exhibit this behavior as well. I think you brought up a really interesting point around how they could be so charming and attractive and appealing to people outside of their homes or their personal relationships, so that, and I hear this a lot from clients, is that he or she presents themselves so great at the masjid or here or there, and how and whatnot, and people would never believe what I have to say. And this goes very close in line to people that we know who also demonstrate abuse, and it comes out a lot in domestic abusive situations, where you cannot believe that this person would do that to their partners, because again, they're so charming. They show themselves as this almost perfect charity giver, helping, giving, being there for people. But subhanAllah, at home, they show the complete opposite of that, where they lift sometimes their partners and just drop them as well, make them feel very low. I hear this a lot from clients as well, where they talk about these things, right? And there's a huge impact on people in terms of how it impacts them, but especially when there are children involved, right? So one of the first questions we have is, how does somebody, and I'll just put it here on the screen, how does someone deal with a narcissist behavior as opposed to being sensitive? Because you brought up a good point, Anisa, where you said that it's almost a pop culture word that's used now very easily when describing a previous abusive partner, that people will just put on that term on that person, right? But also understanding narcissistic behavior may be insensitive. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so even if you don't know if a person has that actual diagnosis or not, because let's face it, it's very difficult to actually get someone who's dealing with narcissism to see a counselor. It doesn't really happen, because oftentimes they will say, oh, I don't need a counselor, or they will go to the counselor and say to the counselor, hey, like, I know all this already. Like, I took a psych class. I read all these books. I could actually sit here and counsel you. So it's very difficult to tackle this and get that person to the right place, because oftentimes they're not willing to admit they have a problem. And then when they go to the professional, they are trying to impress the professional and make the professional feel that they can actually counsel them. So it's what we have to realize is that dealing with narcissistic behavior is very, very challenging. It's very hard to change that. It's very minimal that you can actually bring that person to change, because part of the symptom is they don't take ownership of their actions and their problems. So I think one can't help but feel sensitive at times around such a person, but one has to really work and actively try to not take it personally, and just know that that behavior is about them. It's not about you. They don't have the same capacity that we have for empathy. When they say I love you to their spouse or to their child or friend, it's conditional. It's conditional love. They don't love you the way that you love them. And they may even say things like, I love the way that I can manipulate you just by saying I love you. I love how I can get whatever I want from you just by seeing how much you admire me. So it always goes back to them. And so what I see with my clients too is, like, they're trying to express their love, they're trying to up the game, but they're not going to see the quality of their love change. So understand that you're really never going to win with this person. That narcissistic individual will try to blame everything on you, even if you give them contrary evidence. And one thing that's helpful that is to speak up, right? To express that there are boundaries, that you're not going to accept the behavior. Just know that when you do that, it doesn't mean that they will change, but at least it will allow you to feel a sense of catharsis and not bottle and suppress any kind of sensitivity, or disappointment or hurt that you're feeling. So let them know that they're crossing the line with behaviors and the way that they're treating you, but they may never change and they may never care. So it's really important to encourage them to seek treatment. At least, I mean, again, they may not go for that help, but inshallah, like, what you can do is, if they won't go, then at least you yourself, if you feel like you're getting very sensitive about the situation, you could get the support that you need and go to a mental health professional who can help you sort out all of these emotions and the dynamic in the relationship. So having support from a professional, from family, from friends who exhibit healthy behaviors is so important to make up for such a toxic relationship.
And I think people will project upon them, they will take the projections from the narcissist and actually believe it. This is why you start feeling so low. This is why you start believing what they start saying, because if you're constantly around them, whether in the workplace, whether at home, it's only natural, especially if it's somebody who is in a position of power, or somebody who has some kind of authority or in close connection with, that you're going to start taking what they're saying close to heart. You start doubting yourself. And this is hence why you feel so negative. I can't say it in any other way than that. And believing it. And that's a danger when you start believing the projections of what this person, the insecurity of that person, right? They don't feel good unless they make you feel bad, right?
Right. And part of that, they don't feel good unless they make you feel bad, is because at the root of narcissism is actually a lot of insecurity and pain and, lack of proper connection with their own parents growing up, where their love was very much conditional with their parents, where it's like, if they weren't the best, their parents didn't love them. If they weren't better than everyone else, their parents didn't love them. So as a result, they end up with very low self-esteem, and they try to compensate for that by being extra with other people and putting others down to try to build themselves up, which is just, as you said, can result in the other person feeling like low self-esteem, being a lot of times they will be emotionally abusive, physically abusive. So you also need to know the signs of when to move on from narcissistic abuse, whether it's name calling, public humiliation, gaslighting, trivializing your own needs, threatening behaviors, projecting their shortcomings onto you, telling what you should think, what you should feel. These are all signs that you should get some professional help. You should think about moving on, because the long-term mental health consequences are that you can develop depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and it's a lot of times people think that physical violence is worse than emotional abuse, but the research shows otherwise, that emotional abuse is actually more damaging
in the long term as well. Absolutely. Now, leading into this question, and we'll look at what does moving on, or how to move on and move away. I think moving on is different than getting out of the situation. So we'll look at that a little bit closer later. We have a really good question here: how to live, let's say, with a narcissistic parent. I think we can also explore a little further in terms of a partner or a sibling as well, but there's going to be a different interaction with each one. Let's start with this one, Anisa. How would somebody live with a narcissistic parent?
It's very difficult. I mean, you have to be with that person because they're your parent. So there's no, separating yourself as a child or adolescent, or until maybe you become an adult and you go away for school, you get a job and you get married. So the main thing is to try to just see them for who they are, acknowledge there's little that you can do to change them, but to try your best not to get sucked into their energy. So, sometimes some visualization practices can help, just like imagine yourself holding up a mirror in front of this person, in front of your face, and just deflecting back the negativity that's coming towards you. And I would argue, don't take the positive and don't take the negative from somebody like that. Learn to just validate yourself from within and build your own confidence from within, and take the opinions and advice and the constructive feedback from those who are stable emotionally and those whose opinions truly matter to you. So, see, this is why it becomes important to seek a good support system outside the home, with other friends and family members who can support you and provide some healthy relationships in your life.
And this is really important what you said, Anisa, in terms of not emotionally engaging yourself. A lot of people say, but I live with them. They're my parents. They're Sulat al-Raham. I have to respect them even if they're ABC with me. Absolutely. And we know this from our own Islamic teachings in terms of how to behave towards our parents. But I don't think it fully explores, well, when you're dealing with somebody who has mental health issues or a personality disorder like narcissism, how to deal with it. And this is a therapist where we come in and try to bring in both the Islamic as well as the psychological perspective, where yes, you still have to be respectful, but setting boundaries around yourself in terms of how you engage with them. Because sometimes it's hard to set boundaries to your elders.
Yeah.
It's hard to set that boundary for them, but you can definitely set boundaries for yourself in terms of not emotionally engaging yourself. So trying not to take things very personally, which is extremely hard when it comes to personal relationships, such as with your parents, your siblings, or your partner. It is doable, however, and this is why Anisa kept saying, get help, get support, because when you have that outlet from a third party objective place, then you are able to process things better, get things out in a cathartic manner, so to speak, or even not with therapy, let's say with friends, other friends that you can trust and other family members. But in the therapeutic process, we can teach you the strategies, how to not get emotionally engaged, how to separate your emotions with the person and not engaging yourself. Because once you emotionally engage yourself, and Sister Anisa, you were doing a fantastic program the other night on anger management and how to work with that. So I highly recommend, you can see it on Enlight Media on their YouTube channel. It's all there. I'm not going to go through it now. We're not going to do that. But Sister Anisa and Brother Hussain and Brother Amil were talking about anger management. I think this is something that can be part of the puzzle to help here. When you become angry or emotionally engaged with somebody who is narcissistic, how to cope and deal with that. Because the anger involved here, the hurt, the emotions are real, are valid, and it's normal given the circumstances that you would get emotional and upset and hurt and angry. So it's really important to understand these emotions, be aware that it is about them, not you, and learn how to engage with that. And again, it's not a cookie cutter solution when you're dealing with your parents, perhaps with your siblings, somebody who's older or younger, definitely not with your partner. What are your thoughts about that, dear Anisa, around when it comes to being with a narcissistic partner?
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, it's really important to know the red flags in the spousal selection process. As you're trying to get to know different people, watching out for the signs that we've been talking about. And while you have to maintain respect all the time with anybody you're with, right? Even in a spousal relationship, again, when it comes to somebody creating an unsafe situation for you, when it comes to somebody who is demeaning you, insulting you, using profanity at you, yelling at you. I mean, that all affects one's self-esteem and self-respect. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doesn't want us to be in positions of oppression as well, where we are becoming very antagonistic now because we're internalizing everything, all this negativity coming to us. And so it's really important in those situations to reevaluate and, again, get the help that you need. This is not something you can handle alone. This is like dealing with a bully. And what I always tell when I'm talking about Islamophobia, or when I'm talking to older folks dealing with discrimination in the workplace, what I always say is you need somebody else in the picture many times to advocate for you and to help you identify the correct resources, because it's not easy even to leave a situation like that, because there could be there could be a threat to your life. There could be
children.
Vengeful behavior, manipulative with the children especially involved. So it's not easy to just pick up and leave the situation. You really do need to identify someone who's an expert in helping you remove yourself in the safest way possible, if that's what it comes down to.
And not aggravating or getting the attention of your partner when you do make the safety plan. It's crucial that the safety is number one here. And it can be so hard when you're trying to almost suppress your emotions temporarily while you're going through it. It's almost a traumatic situation. It's highly full of emotions, this whole process of trying to get out of such a situation, because there's a lot of mind games, manipulations, and this is where you believe everything almost that they say, right? So it's hard for you to think about leaving, but he loves me, she loves me, but I love them, right? But it's not about love. And I really appreciated how you pointed that out right at the beginning, sister, where you said they may say they love you, but it's love with conditions. I love you, but only when you do this, right? I love you, and like you said, when you make me feel. So somebody who's trying to leave such a situation, they almost have to make a mental break of pulling themselves away from these manipulative thoughts. I know, obviously, with our clients, but also friends, and we have all been in these types of situations in some way or another with the narcissistic, abusive type of people in our lives, whether it's personal, whether it's work, or just people that we meet. So somebody brought up a comment here, and I'm just going to put it on the screen as well, where they said, yesterday I saw an interview of a famous actor. One of the questions asked to the man was, who is your role model inspiration? He replied, me.
Wow. Yep.
MashaAllah. That person must have,
with what we're talking about today. Yep.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see how sometimes, people or that, like, you will come across from them in all walks of life, anywhere really. And I think part of our program here today is not to solve the problem of narcissism. That's never going to change. It's a personality disorder. We're trying to bring awareness. We're going to give real life examples, scenarios that people have sent to us, and just thinking whether it's with clients or personal experiences as well to share. Our whole goal, inshallah, for this program is to bring awareness, and for those people to seek help if they are in these situations, because it is more common. I've seen so much of this within our own communities. It's everywhere, but so much more within, more awareness of it, I would say, now within our community. It's always been there, but looking at it now, whether it is narcissistic, which can lead to abuse, we see so many marriages fall apart because of this. A lot of our clients as well, even from the Muslim community, we hear this. And a lot of it, I have to say, this is an educated guess, not factual research statistics, but from the top of my head, from what I've seen overall within the community and with the clients, it seems to be very male associated. It seems to fall in line with characters of a lot of males. Let me reword it. A lot of males seem to have this narcissistic qualities and traits. What are your thoughts on that, Anisa?
And when I came across the research on this, yes, that's what the research is saying too, is that it tends to be that men are more prone to narcissistic personality disorder than women. Not to say that women can't also have it.
Of course they can.
I have come across women with it, but yes, it tends to be that way. And part of it, again, is that nurturing of how we talk to our boys as
yes
is so important.
Yes.
If we create a system of entitlement where, you're a boy, okay, you know, we'll do everything for you. We clean for you. Your sister will do your laundry. You know, you don't have to work. Don't cook. No, that's aib. This is shameful. You know,
Wow.
this is the woman's job. You know, you work, this is wrong. This is not part of Islam and what it teaches us. And Islam is all about looking at the relationship between men and women as a partnership, as a team, that
Yes.
not, you know, you work together on building this beautiful akhlaq in the relationship where everyone, you know, we don't have these strict ideas of this person does this and this person does that. No, this is cultural. I mean, we see
Right.
this culturally, but Islamically, you look at the life of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam and Imam Ali, and you see both of them they did chores together in the house. They did chores outside the house. They, you know, they helped with the children. You know, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Khadija alayhi salam. She was this amazing CEO, contributing her money and all she had to the family. We hear stories of, you know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like, you know, mending his own clothing, very humble, helping with the cooking. So these notions of entitlement, they become a form of sexism in our community. And this, unfortunately, this misogyny that we see, this sexism, it can certainly contribute to narcissism as well. So I've seen it too a lot in the community. And also the way we've got to be careful of how we talk about things as well. So I hear a lot of people talk about envy in the community, like, oh my God, this girl over here, she's so jealous of me. Or if something bad happened to me, somebody must have done hasad on me. Somebody must have like envied me. Sometimes people, they live by that. It's like everything is hasad and envy and black magic, and that's why that is everyone just wants to be me and so jealous of me. So we've got to.
That's an interesting way how women would possibly show that narcissism. I never thought of it that way, but really self-centered that way, rather than perhaps exploring and acknowledging some character traits that they have that could probably rub people off the wrong way. And then when bad things happen, that's such an interesting way of looking at it.
It might not be that they're jealous of you. It may be that they're tired of you talking about other people being jealous of you. You know, it's if you sit next to somebody and that's all they talk about, how everybody wants to be them and how people are trying to sabotage their life, and you don't feel comfortable with them, because then they're asking, okay, does that mean that's how you feel about me too? Will you feel that way? So we also have to watch how we just communicate about things like that. Not to say that it doesn't have a place and there aren't people who are envious.
Absolutely.
But, taking, rather than externalizing the issues we see, saying, okay, how am I playing a role in this problem?
Internalizing, I would say, in a healthy way without personalizing too much. So recognizing things that we need to work on, because like you said, it doesn't mean if you have this trait, it means that you are a female narcissist. No, it just means perhaps we need to be aware of some of the traits that you embody so that you can work on them. And alhamdulillah, we all have these things that we need to work on and get better at, right? And that's part of our journey of growth, spiritual as well as personal growth. Yeah. Very interesting. 2 questions here that popped up. Let's say here. So we low points from time to time. How would you disarm a narcissist in a relationship as to not to let them penetrate your inner being in a negative manner? I think we took a look at that in terms of, perhaps let's explore now what I mentioned earlier, which is to not engage emotionally with that. So what that means perhaps here in this case, not engaging, is that when somebody says something to you, and you notice you start feeling bad, is to, rather than allow yourself to go lower and lower, is to be aware that I am feeling bad. Why am I feeling bad? To be aware of that. And recognize that although you don't have control over what this person says or does around you, you have control over how you choose to respond. So soon as you recognize something is said to you where the repeated pattern here of that other person's projection and behavior, you notice you start feeling bad, then you can stop right there and say, okay, I can continue feeling bad, or That's what they're doing. They're projecting, they're gaslighting. This is where education comes in. When you read about this, then you begin to recognize how the narcissist plays their game. And this is where you can not allow yourself to engage with the negative emotions to go down even lower and lower. So this is one strategy in terms of how, when it comes onto you, how to disengage, being aware and observing mindfully what is happening around you, rather than engaging your emotions and right away getting into hurt, anger, and being very sad. What other strategies do you have, sister, that you help clients with this way?
Yeah, I think when you have it has an energy. Every comment that someone throws at you has an energy and a certain you can let it occupy the space in your heart and mind, or you can just look at it like you were saying on the outside and see it as, okay, this is how this individual is perceiving me, but it's not, that's their own reality, and I'm not responsible for the reality of somebody who is not emotionally stable. If anything, I look at their comment and I don't trust it and I don't give it value, because I understand that this person is not in the best place psychologically speaking. So deflecting, like we talked about with that mirror image, just deflecting back what's being said and recognizing that no one can make you feel anything in life. If you can just let that sink in, really, no one can make you feel something. When you are feeling something, it's a result of your own thought process about the situation. And so, not to say that on dealing with a situation ongoing like that doesn't affect a person, it does. But in the moment, you can choose to say, well, I'm gonna really get upset about this, I'm going to get frustrated or angry over this. Or you can say, this comment doesn't have any value to me, and I'm going to listen to the comments of individuals whose values and feedback truly matter, because this person's feedback doesn't to me. It doesn't. This is what I encourage folks, is that sometimes we go to friends, we go to people we trust, and we want advice and we want guidance on situations. However, those people, sometimes they're struggling with the same things, or they're not experts in that area to give you proper feedback on yourself, or what you're struggling with. So it's important to really have, I always say to my clients, identify a couple of people in your life whose opinions and feedback truly matter. Because in life, we can't only just say Allah's opinion is all that matters. No, like if you're in a relationship with somebody, their opinions also matter as well. If you're in a marriage, if you're in with your children, there's certain people who you care about, that you want to improve, and you need that constructive feedback. But if it's, again, coming from somebody who is mentally impaired, somebody who is toxic in their behavior, then you have to really reevaluate how much you want to internalize that.
And it brings us to a really good question that somebody just asked about this. Sometimes it's not easy to get a third party to help when you're stuck in that situation, and it's hard to, and you want to get help because you can truly love this person and you want things to change. And so we're not saying to leave right away, of course not, unless of course it's abusive and dangerous and violent. But let's say you want to work on it and make the attempt, at least for yourself. You could say, I've tried everything that I can. This person's asking, what type of language can we use to get the person to realize their narcissistic behavior? Is that even possible, do you think, Anisa?
Like I said earlier, you can definitely set boundaries and share with this person where you feel they've crossed the line, but it doesn't mean they're going to change. And if they truly have diagnosable narcissistic personality disorder, the chance of changing is very, very minute. So
even if they get help, do you think? Like, because there are people who've actually had, let's say, borderline personality disorder, which has a lot of narcissistic tendencies, who've acknowledged and gotten the help. Very rare, but do you believe that it can be treated?
It can be. I mean, it's not an impossibility. We have to, I think, as counseling professionals, always have hope that people can change. But again, part of the symptom is that they don't take ownership. They don't want to change. They feel they don't need a professional, that
they're in the right.
They are their own professional when it comes to this.
They're their own inspirations.
Yeah, so you can talk to them in a way where you say, you know, I notice or I observe that when we're communicating, it's so much of what we discuss is about you, or much of the time I come to you and I share a problem that we're going through, and it seems like you don't empathize with what I'm dealing with, you don't take it seriously. Are you aware of this? You know, just check in with this. Is this something you're aware of? And, you know, many times they'll be like, no, I don't, you know, no. So see if they are accepting of some influence from you, that, you know, oh, tell me more, tell me what you mean. What do you mean by that? Okay, maybe sometimes I am a little bit like that. I can see how that might be true. I mean, that's a good sign right there, that they're accepting of your influence in the relationship, and they're accepting that maybe they are a part of the problem. So just start off by explaining what you're observing, and then ask a lot of open-ended questions. Do you realize you're doing this to me? Do you realize this is the way I'm feeling? How do you think we can improve the relationship? How do you think we can make changes so that I'm not feeling this way and you're not feeling that way? Just asking a lot of open-ended questions.
Sister, here, in regards to that, I think this goes in line with language here. Does religion play a role for someone trying to deal with a narcissistic individual? Is it possible to take that approach in language? God loves those who are humble. And you brought up that beautiful ayah from the Quran in terms of talking about being humble. It's so hard when you're dealing with somebody who believes perhaps they're doing a favor to God. And this is astaghfirullah for that type of language, but I've come across people who've actually exhibited this type of behavior, that when they're doing good, they're doing it for God, but they're doing it for God. Like it's almost like in Arabic we say minniya. I'm not sure how to say that in English, right? That they're doing a favor, I guess, for God, that you showed me to do this and I'm doing this. I remember when I was taking a course on the 40 hadiths, and the sheikh in there was describing the different characteristics from envy to asabiya and ghadab, anger and behavior. And there's a huge chapter where we talk about arrogance, we talk about takabbur, talking about riya and pride and all of these things. And I remember reading and studying this and said, wow, this fits with a lot of people we know in our communities. This fits with a lot of the narcissistic types that we deal with our clients, and perhaps narcissists that we have around us. And this just reminds me here, God loves those who are humble. Yet those same people, and this reminds me of another question that somebody just posted here, which I'm also going to show, talking about having local religious leaders as narcissists in our community. Behavior reflects that, and how they value, devalue, discard, smear, the smear cycle of a narcissist and their victim. So all of these things link together, I think, in terms of that language of humbleness. We see it perhaps, but the narcissist is going to say, I'm humble, you are not humble. You are the one that is not humble. I'm humble. I am a God-serving servant. I do this for God. I can't help but laugh because I have images of different people that are popping up into my head. And yeah, it just goes in line with the sister who's sharing her comments. What are your thoughts around that while I go through these other comments to share, sister?
Well, it's certainly important to encompass the spiritual aspect of this in conversations. I do think it is important to enjoin the good, right? Amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar, and part of that is enjoining humility. And so, having these conversations, reminding your spouse, I don't know if you realize this, but, when you do this behavior, it comes off as quite arrogant. And the Quran talks about the importance of being humble and going through life that way. But again, sometimes you see, because it's part of the problem is they don't have the ability to empathize the way they should, they end up saying, well, oh, I am humble. You know, I give to this, I give to this charitable organization. A lot of times they
Yes,
give to charitable organizations to show other people, like, oh, look at me,
exactly.
you know.
Look at me, the riyah here. Look at what
Yeah, you
all
don't
the
know
good that I do.
and that's what's confusing. I work with some clients, they'll tell me, you know, I don't understand, I'm confused because this man, he started this charitable organization, but yet he treats me like this at home, and how can he be so
Wow.
good and be doing that, but then, you know, he's treating me like this. So we got to realize, not, you know, there's some good and there's some bad in everybody, but we don't know at the end of the day what their niyyah and their intention is. It could be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it could be to just elevate their status in the community. But what's interesting is I want to bring up another a verse from the Quran that talks about arrogance. In chapter 7, verse 147, he says, I will turn away my signs, my ayat, from those who behave arrogantly on earth without a right. And even if they see all the proof, all the evidence, all the lessons and the signs, all the ayat, right? They will not believe in them.
Allahu Akbar.
Isn't that what the definition of a narcissist is? They, you know, so Allah, you know, at some point he turns away from these people, because no matter what you bring to them, they don't want to see it. They don't want to recognize it.
They are blind.
They're, you know, deaf, dumb.
Yeah.
So again, sometimes you think if Allah can bring evidence to so many generations and they turn away and they deny over and over, who are, you know, how hard it is for us to try to bring evidence and try to show people in relationships, and, you know, expect them to just accept the feedback and to improve if they don't even do that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Wow. That's a lot to process right there, I would think. But I think there's so much enlightenment in what you're saying, sister, especially to those who are struggling with people who they live with, who they're trying to help, and who are not accepting this help. That example that you brought up, where the woman's husband started a charity organization in the community, for me, it's so comical. You're doing good and you're bringing such attention to yourself for helping others, yet you're a piece of garbage at home, disrespecting your partner. We have seen cases of people cheating on their partners, self-entitlement, and of course using you're allowed up to 4 wives, and you're allowed to, you know, extramarital halal relationships because you're a man and you're entitled. It's fascinating to see all of this fall into the characteristic of a narcissistic Muslim male, what we're describing here. It just fits beautifully into what we see in our community, from the Muslim community, with this character. It's actually quite scary. It goes with what somebody mentioned here, having local leaders or people in positions of power as narcissists. Yeah. How do you deal with that? You can't disable them from the positions that they're in, because some of these people have wealth and power in where they are. And unfortunately, I've come across people like that who have such sexist, demeaning attitudes or racist attitudes. And these, most of them are males. Sorry, I am not dumping on males here. I'm just saying what we have seen professionally in therapy and outside in the community, outside of therapy within the community. And you guys know this, you've seen it, where people are in these positions of power tend to be males, right? And they have these attitudes. We have seen females as well who show such goodness and character and giving of their time and charity, et cetera, but also all about them, all about them, all about them. And it's quite sickening. You naturally, subhanAllah, you were turned off from this kind of thing. This leads me to well, let's look at this. Let's look at this before. So many ideas are just jumping around and examples, and it's such a juicy topic to talk about. And there's a lot of questions here, mashallah, popping up, but we also have questions we need to go through from that people have sent in. But just let's address this one. How do we deal? Because we talked about personally in the home with a parent, with a partner as well, but how do we deal with religious or community leaders or people in positions of power who exhibit these narcissistic behaviors? And how, as a community, do we deal with that? Because it is detrimental. People are kicked out of I've seen this firsthand, that people are kicked out of certain communities because of a power-hungry narcissist in power. right? And how they mistreat and how they slander and how all of that. So what are your thoughts around that? How, as a community, can we help with this or deal with it and cope with it?
Yeah, you had a actually beautiful discussion with Hussain the other day about, slander and backbiting in the community and exploitation and how to deal with that. And the one thing I really like that you both touched on that I want to bring up again is the whole idea that, this is nothing new. This using the role of a religious leader to try to exploit others and to gain power. We have seen this. The Quran talks about generation upon generation of individuals like this who wear the clothing of garb of someone who's pious and religious, and yet they're manipulating the system. It's like, again, to talk about an analogy here, it's like, if you, many times what people don't realize is in sexual abuse cases, for example, it's not the stranger danger that's the problem. Usually it's somebody that the family has trusted.
Right.
Somebody, it's a relative, it's somebody that's been invited into the home, who's had a chance to groom the child in the home, right? And so what often happens is we just need to become self-aware more as a community, that just because this person wears an amama and he speaks a lot about Islam and he's such a person of authority and power and respect in the community, doesn't mean you can trust him. You don't trust somebody just because they have a certain persona and wear a uniform. You
right.
know, if anything, these people many times will take advantage of that power. And so this spiritual abuse is something that I have come across. And it's what's most important is to just be self-aware in these situations. Don't put yourself in a situation that feels, you have a gut feeling in your fitra that this isn't right. This man is inviting me to his hotel for a discussion, a spiritual discussion after an event.
Spiritual discussion.
Spiritual. I'm sure it's very spiritual.
I'm sure.
You gotta also see some red flags here and not put yourself, I'm not victim blaming at all. I hold these people fully accountable. I want to make that clear, but it's important to protect yourself.
Be aware. Yes. Yeah, the red flags are there, and that can be actually a whole discussion on its own that we could look into one day, because I know there's a lot of mainstream media out there, non-Muslim media, who have gotten a wind of what these temporary relationships are all about and abuse within the Muslim community with religious leaders, and they're doing documentaries on this to expose Muslim sheikhs. And if anything, it looks like more of like an Islamophobic attack. I think we need to change the narrative on that as Muslims and as women and men working together to talk about this, first of all, because we know when it comes to racism, discrimination, sexism, misogyny, any of these types of ism, that you need to acknowledge that it's happening. We cannot deny, because the more you push, deny, and put it aside, the more it will come back and hit you harder. I was just doing a program on racism earlier, and the research that I came across, and we know this as therapists, that the more you push something aside, the more it will have mental health issues and detrimentals later for you later on. So you need to first acknowledge that it is happening. We know that it's happening within our communities. What are we doing about it? We're pushing it aside to the point that you have people outside of the community who've heard about this from, let's say, converts, reverts, or people who have been abused, who are speaking about it to other mediums, because our own community and narcissistic religious powers, or whatever you want to call it, are not listening. And then so they go and have people listening to them who have the means and the power to expose, but they have their own agendas, perhaps Islamophobic agendas or whatever it is, to hurt people. So then when it's gone in that direction, our narrative is taken. And especially, let's say, if the victims are women, it's no longer focused on the victims and helping and supporting them. But now there's almost a narcissistic media involved here, in terms of, look at these Muslims, look at what they do, look at how they hurt others, look at how they abuse, look at ABC. So the narrative is taken away here from the women who are abused and exposed in a way of it just becomes a mess. It becomes a dirty, nasty mess, and away from the core issue of the victims here, right? And this is where, again, as Muslims, we need to take back the narrative, acknowledge that it's happening, Have measures in place for people who abuse this power, who abuse their position and do not value and respect the position that they're blessed to be in by hurting others. There is a day where all of your sins will be exposed. There is a day, we know this, like whatever you do and hurt onto others is going to come back and haunt you, right? And I think for far too long, like you said, Sister Anisa, this has been happening since the beginning of time. But I think it's gone on far too long as well within our communities. By the way, this is not just men with women. This is women who also do this as well. And we know this firsthand as therapists, right, sister, that those who are abusive is not just men. So I just want to make that clear in case people start saying, why are you just hating on men here? I'm not. The reality happens to both. But again, most people who are in positions of power are the males. And we see this. And it's so vital. You can see I'm very passionate about it because we've seen so many victims, too many victims who are hurt and taken advantage of in this. But now, like I said, there are other medias that have heard about this and other platforms who want to do documentaries around this. This is just exposing things in the wrong way. As Muslims, we need to take the narrative back. We need to take control of our story, and as women as well. And then it all has to do with education, right? So sister, when you're talking about red flags, we're not victim blaming here. We are bringing awareness to something. Women, you need to be more aware of these red flags, just like the example that Sister Anisa gave. If he's inviting you to a hotel for a spiritual discussion, really? Is that a spiritual discussion? So these are things I think a lot of us need to be a little bit more aware of. And it's very hard when you're dealing with this type of personality, because again, like you said, Sister Anisa, they are putting themselves in a position of being trusted, charismatic. They would never do anything to harm anybody. Meanwhile, they could be using their charitable organization as a cover, right? To show how good they are. But meanwhile, they are these evil, black-hearted people. Allah only knows, but their actions are seen through the other people that they've hurt and victimized. So definitely there's a lot to be said around that. And we know that a lot of people go through this. And I think it goes in line with the next question here that somebody said, what advice would you give to a sister that got a divorce from a narcissist? I think this is a classic scenario that we see here. Yeah, from an arrogant, big-name family, and of whom went and then ruined the reputation of the sister, stating she is unchaste. And continues here, and cheated when she was chaste and loyal, and has no reputation in the community to stand up for her. What are your thoughts around this, sister? Because this is a classic situation that happens again and again in our communities. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, this saddens me deeply whenever I hear of a situation like this, because going through a relationship that is like that and has that dynamic is already so painful. Then going through a divorce is traumatic. And then on top of that, you're trying to just move on with your life and forget about what happened, but you have other people in the community maligning that woman's character, stating she's unchaste, she's this and she's that. It's again, sometimes people will not. It's difficult to find someone who will be on your side. It is. I'm not saying that it's easy, but you can find. It is possible to find someone who's going to advocate for you. Unfortunately, there's just people. Not everybody is educated on these issues, right? And so most Americans, like I was reading a statistic the other day, 95% of Muslims will go to a sheikh to deal with a mental health related challenge or issue than to go to a mental health professional, even someone who's Muslim. And the problem is, not to say that shuyukh and imams cannot be incredibly helpful. I've had many wonderful collaborative relationships with those who are, they're trained in mental health first aid, they're trained in recognizing signs of domestic violence and those issues. But what I often come across is sadly women, telling me, I went to this individual, they didn't believe me. I went to this guy, the sheikh at this mosque, he just said, be patient. This person just gave me a lecture. This person just invalidated everything I said. So it's about who you reach out to, that's key. You want to reach out to someone who is an expert in dealing with these issues and dealing with spiritual abuse and dealing with toxic relationships, who can help you advocate. That's part of the process of counseling. People don't realize is it's not just about talking about the past and working through problems and tools, but that individual who's working with you is also an advocate for you, to help stand up for you, to help you identify resources and different systems within the community that can help you address this, whether it's legally, whether it's support organizations that deal with these types of situations. So it's really important to reach out to the right person and to be persistent. I always tell my young people, especially my youth, listen, if you want to talk about mental health or any issue that you're passionate about, and you go to the masjid board and they don't want to hear it, and you go to this person and they don't want to hear it, don't get discouraged. Keep going. There's somebody out there who is going to listen, who is going to be there for you, who's going to believe you. And it's just a matter of persistence, and it's worth it in the end to keep going, even though I know it's disappointing and it feels like a trial and error process sometimes. Reach out to those who are experts, licensed mental health professionals, social workers, psychologists, those who can help you advocate.
Bless you, sister. That's such an important point, what you bring up. And just to complement what you were saying with this specific type of scenario that we see often, it takes a lot of courage and energy for the person who's been accused of this wrongfully to do what they need to supposedly to clear their name, perhaps, or sometimes if you don't say anything, then silence is compliance, right? And all of, there's so many different things around this issue. I mean, like I said, this in itself is a whole topic on itself that perhaps we can explore another time, but it is important to get the right supports in place. And in the end, you have to hope and believe that people who are in these positions of power, because this is a power dynamic when you are dealing with, arrogant big name families and whatnot, they do have the power to ruin reputations potentially. But also, I think the people who are listening and hearing this, there is a huge responsibility from the community to stand up to this abuse and slander as well. And there's always two sides to a story. We know that, of course, but this is a classic situation that we see time and time again. Yeah. And I think it's really important to teach our daughters and our boys as well, our sons, the proper behavior. And this is one of the questions we have here is, how do you teach your daughter self-empowerment without fear that it may lead to narcissism? This is interesting because then there's a fine line between, let's say, confidence, self-esteem, and arrogance and narcissism. That's a fine line. What are your thoughts with that one, sister?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question, because you definitely want to teach your children to have confidence, but too much confidence could be a problem as well. So we know, again, as we talked about earlier, narcissistic personality disorder is very much influenced by parenting styles and those formative relationships growing up. So as parents, we have a responsibility to instill in our children confidence without having them develop a self-inflated ego. So one of the biggest things is to make sure that you are connecting with your children based on the love that you have for them, and helping them, rather than just saying you're special, you're smart, you're this, saying to me you are special because you do A, B, and C. If somebody, for example, it's the language too plays a role. A lot of times people, they'll just tell their kids, you're so smart, you can do anything, you can be anything.
You're beautiful. You're so pretty.
What you want to do is give constructive feedback, where, for example, if a child shows you their artwork, instead of saying, oh my God, you're such an artist, or, you talk about what they did. You talk
Right.
about, wow, I can tell how much effort you put into that. You worked really hard on that. You don't want to say like, oh, your artwork is better than all the other kids' artwork at school, right? That's going to lead to some problems down the road. You don't want to make them feel like they're better than other people, more special than others. And it's really important to avoid perfection, avoid focusing focusing on perfection. Avoid telling them that they need to be the best and that they need to compare themselves to other people in their class and do better than them. You want them to be intrinsically motivated, where they compare themselves to themselves and say, am I better than I was yesterday? Am I improving in this compared to what I knew last week? So just helping them understand that everyone excels differently, and not comparing other people, cousins, family, or whatever to your child. So providing action focus rather than focusing on the personality, and then again really instilling empathy and talking about what the Quran mentions about empathy, and in not in giving to others what you would want for yourself, and treating others the way that you would want to be treated. So all those are very important.
And this goes with another question here. So how to raise a child not to be a narcissist, but then if you were raised by a narcissist, you might be inclined to go in the opposite direction and avoid sharing your thoughts, feelings, needs, and desires. How do you create a healthy balance with that? That's a very good question, and challenging, because as a child growing up, seeing your parents as they are, you model them, you follow what they teach you. They are your universe, so to speak, right? And you follow that. You don't know really much right and wrong until you start developing your own abstract ideas and develop that a little bit further later on, when, subhanAllah, your fitra, your instinct really comes in, right? You start becoming aware of your fitra, rather, and the red flags. So I think this perhaps requires a bit of education, is that if you are aware that you were raised by a narcissist, it's not impossible to rewire the brain cells, so to speak, right? The pathways in your brain. But this again requires acknowledgement, awareness, and actually going through the therapeutic process where you can, almost like trauma therapy, right? To break the memories attached to the emotion and the thoughts and the desires that your parents perhaps instilled in you and what not. Right? So learn to break that and replace it with more healthy ways of looking at how to engage with other people around you in terms of sharing thoughts, feelings, and desires and whatnot. It's a challenge when you're dealing with past trauma, the way that your family raises you and what you experience. And as therapists, Anisa and I are going to say, go through the therapeutic process, because even whatever advice we give right now, most of this is through the therapeutic process. It's not a boom overnight thing. You have to actually go through it step by step to allow your brain to process this and relink and rework and make new neural pathways to change behaviors and change the way you respond and change the way you look at a memory. What are your thoughts, sister, with this question?
Yes, again, not to sound like a broken record that, we're just promoting therapy over and over, but here's the thing. The younger you are, the more capable as well, and the easier it will be to make these changes and to rewire your mind, especially if you're under 25. So, because once you're 25, your prefrontal cortex, your decision-making part of the brain is fully developed. Your brain is fully developed at that point. So it's not that you can't learn new information or, deal with trauma, but it's more challenging. So the sooner you get help, the better. And inshallah, it will help prevent. The problem that I see a lot that I wanted to touch on is that a lot of times when children are raised by narcissistic individuals, they end up choosing spouses who are themselves narcissistic, even though they have insight. They know they don't want that. They know their parent has A, B, and C issue, but it's the familiarity that they had with that parent, right? It felt comfortable.
Exactly.
So anything else that feels different from that feels like, oh, this isn't right. Even though different doesn't mean it's bad for you. It just means that it could mean that it's healthier, but it doesn't feel like what you know. And so because of that, what I see is women just over and over picking partners that are just like, their narcissistic parent. So this is part of the reason why it's really important to get professional support, so that you don't fall into that trap, and the sooner the better.
And there seems to be, mashallah, or sadly rather, unfortunately, a lot of questions around parenting, children involved. Like we see here, a lot of questions around, what are prevalent childhood traumas that can lead to child having narcissistic personality disorder. I think we talked a little bit about that, but I see a lot of specific cases and examples here of people that are sent to us and are still writing. So keep doing that. We'll try to get to them as much as we can. We have about 15 minutes left before we end, inshallah. And it's sad, but I think it's so important that we do explore these so that we can perhaps shed some light, awareness, and get people rolling to getting the appropriate support that they can. By the way, we just left Instagram. Don't worry about it. we're just on Facebook and YouTube now. So one of the questions that somebody asked, and I have part of it here, and I'll read the rest of it here. It says, how to help your child who's around 9 years old understand their parent's a narcissist. And a part B or in line with that is another question. So this is a scenario that somebody gave me permission to share. I was married to a narcissist. I did my best to cope with the situation and to deal with him. But it failed when I came to know he was secretly married to another woman and he got children over there too. Again, this is a classic scenario we hear about. It's not something new. I have 3 children with him. Now I'm a single mother. Sometimes I see and feel the same habits or just say symptoms like him. That makes me worried always. I don't want anybody else to suffer as I did. So this mother's concerned that her children may behave the same way that their father did with other partners. Please explain to me and guide me how I can deal with my children and how I can make them feel or become aware that the habits are narcissistic. So, I mean, there's a lot here to decipher in this case scenario, which is a real situation. But let's focus on the last part here. How can we help children as young as, let's say, 9 or even younger? And a lot of people I know personally deal with situations where they're ex-partners and they're sharing children. How do we help our children without bad-mouthing? Because this is a challenging thing when you have an ex-partner who is a narcissist, male or female. How do you protect, help raise your kids when, let's say, it's a high conflict divorce or separation, and you are just not co-parenting the same way, or perhaps different levels of religiosity, philosophies in life and parenting. So there's a lot around that. What are your thoughts, sister, with this one? I'll chip in too after, but what are your thoughts essentially?
No, I like how you mentioned without bad mouthing. First of all, I'm very sorry to hear of this sister's experience. I mean, it's just so horrible, and I've heard similar stories from others as well, so I know she's not alone. But the one thing you never want to do is badmouth the other parent in front of the child, no matter how bad things were, because even though you're not with that person anymore, that individual is still a parent of that child, is part of their identity. So what you want to do is help your child recognize the unhealthy behaviors, right? To label the behavior as toxic, rather than saying, your dad's a narcissist, your dad's manipulative, he's A, B, and C. So you're going to have to do a lot of damage control with your child, which is draining and exhausting. And of course, if your ex is getting violent or, very abusive with your child, making sure you're stepping in, you're advocating for your child so that they're not being harmed. So you may need to look at reevaluate what joint custody looks like, if it's appropriate for that child to be alone with the parent, taking proper maybe legal action just to make sure your child is protected. So what you want is to help your child understand, listen, unfortunately, your mother or your father just doesn't have the capacity to empathize and show the love and show the care that is required to be a dad. And your dad he isn't like that. And unfortunately, because of that, it will help you if you lower your expectations, if you understand your parent, your mom or your dad who is exhibiting this behavior is not going to be the kind of parent that you hoped for. And I think one of the best ways to help our children cope, especially from a spiritual perspective, is to talk about the prophets and the imams who, the companions as well of the Ahlul Bayt, who went through similar journeys where they had family members who were abusive. Abu Lahab, for example, for Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or even Musa with Fir'aun. I know that Fir'aun wasn't his father, but he did raise him. And this is a man who I don't think, Pharaoh, you cannot find a more arrogant man in the Quran. This is somebody who said, Ana rabbukum al-ala, I am your Lord, the Most High. I mean, that's the epitome of arrogance in a person. And yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still commands Musa alayhi salam to speak to him with respect and to speak with him with kindness. So, you know, just these stories need to be made applicable to the lives of our children. You know, let's talk about these stories. Let's reflect on that. You know, that you're struggling in a way similar to our prophet right now. You're struggling in a similar way to Musa alayhi salam right now. Look how they got through it. Look how they talked to Allah through it. You can do the same.
It's so beautiful and empowering, sister. And I think that's one of the most beautiful ways to include our Islamic history and lessons for our children, by embodying and looking back to the root of what we have as lessons of showing them respect, even in the face of arrogance, and how to do that. That's so empowering. I think a lot of parents need to hear that. And perhaps we can go back and reread those stories to see how we can present it to our children. And mashallah, there's so many authors now within our communities who have all these beautiful illustrations in these books for our children to read and to use and learn lessons from. There's a really, I don't have it here, I can't go get it, but it's a book on 40 hadiths for children. And there's another book we have that I've either bought at different places, or people have been kind to sending them to my daughter. And you sent my daughter on her birthday this year, especially as a mukallafa, a series of beautiful stories and lessons for children to follow. And I think if we can take the energy away from the negativity of the narcissist behavior and put it towards using that energy and redirecting it in a positive way, then we are teaching our children how to deal with this negative energy. I think there's a huge lesson of acceptance as well, without bad naming and calling them names, right? By saying, this is how they understand things. This is the way they view things. That is different than how I see things, and I respect their right to have a different view, even though I disagree. So these are life skills, important life skills that we need to teach. And sometimes as parents, we're at a loss on how to cope and deal with that. I have another book, I can't get it, it's not near me right now, but it's actually called How to Co-Parent with a Jerk, or something like that. It's about high conflict divorces and separations and things like that. And this could be a really good resource for parents who are trying to look at it from a psychological mental health perspective, in terms of how to cope with the parent, but how to help your children as well. But sister, thank you so much for that wonderful explanation. And just it's very inspirational. I think when we go back to the roots of our faith, and as parents to remind ourselves as well, but how we can present that. And like I said, there's mashallah so many publications out there. There's Safa books. There are, please help me out, sister, I forgot at the top of my head.
Kids.
Yes, Kisat Kids. Sister Sahar Jabir is publishing a book soon, inshallah, on hijab. Her publication is Figs and Olives, I believe, publications. Sister Zainab Merchant has written a few books for children as well, one on hijab. There's one on I'm a Muslim. So there's so many wonderful books that we didn't have, you and I, sister, growing up living in the West, especially on how to cope and deal with challenges that we're experiencing. I think some of our kids who go to Muslim schools, Islamic schools, don't necessarily have to deal with this. I know my daughter, alhamdulillah, she doesn't necessarily have to. But I know kids who are in the public system, of course, are going to be facing these types of situations. Totally off topic here, but just a shout out to the wonderful resources out there for parents to use and to help deal with this, because it's not an easy situation. Because, of course, all you want to do is instinctively swear every swear word in the book against this person who's enraged you, hurt you, taken advantage of you, abused you. And of course, you know, your child's caught in the middle. What do? You have to be emotionally intelligent here to understand that if you make your partner look bad and say all sorts of things against them, that's going to harm your child. That's also not going to do anything for your relationship with your child. This could also push this child away from you, and probably it's the last thing you want to do. It's so damaging, emotionally and mentally damaging. So it's really tricky, and it's important to understand this. And perhaps if you are still struggling with past trauma and pain, because here's another reality we have to talk about when it comes to abuse and the impact, let's say, of a narcissistic ex, is that you are potentially could be triggered by this person. How do you deal with these triggers? This is where, again, therapy comes in to help you process and work through, learn how to disengage, learn how to be mindful, learn how to set boundaries around yourself and that person as well. I see a therapist, and I openly talk about seeing a therapist because I highly encourage seeing a therapist. We all have challenges in our lives as well that sometimes we're in our cocoon, we can't see outside of it. And he taught me something brilliant when it came to dealing with these types of personalities. And he says, keep it brief. I'm like, what do you mean? Brief. So let's see if I can remember this correctly. So be brief for B, respectful. E, I forget what it's for. I forget what it's for. Help me out if you remember. But F, friendly. So basically, keep it short and brief, to the point, and friendly and respectful, and just keep it very short. This is how you can, I got to find it up again because I forgot the whole thing. But the idea here is not to emotionally get engaged. Just cool, calm, keep those emotions, and you work on your emotions through the therapeutic process, or let it out through a punching bag, or go work out, or let out that rage. Go watch Sister Anisa's program on anger management. Inshallah, that can help you as well. So we're almost going to wrap up here. Let's see if we have any other questions. I think all the other questions are very similar. There's one that says how to deal with a narcissistic mother-in-law. That's an interesting one because we looked at parents, we looked at partners, we looked at perhaps people at work. Let's take a look at this one before ending off with the last question, which has to do with how do we start beginning healing parts of ourselves. So sister, what are your thoughts on how should we deal with a narcissistic mother-in-law?
So it's really important to set healthy boundaries here. It's important that as you are selecting a spouse, that you also get to know the family around the spouse, because oftentimes I'm not saying this is always the case, but if there's a narcissistic parent, then the offspring of that parent may also exhibit those same issues. And there's a lot of boundary setting that needs to occur with in-law relationships, because it can be a real trigger for conflicts within a marriage. And if the spouse is just like the mother, he's not going to, or she's not going to accept influence from you in regard to boundary setting. So something that might play out is the mother-in-law becomes very manipulative with the time, that maybe they, just constantly popping over all the time, expecting unrealistic expectations on the son or the daughter-in-law in relation to the son, a sense of entitlement. And if the husband isn't, or the wife is not somebody who is accepting influence from their spouse and just mostly taking the influence from this parent, right, it can create a really toxic dynamic in the relationship, where the person who's in control here is now the mother-in-law or the father-in-law. So it's really critical to have these conversations ahead of time about, setting clear boundaries, living arrangements. I don't recommend a living arrangement in which one person is, has narcissistic tendencies in the household, if that can be avoided. Carving, and I think the main thing is to recognize, again, you're not going to give in to the manipulation. You're going to stop focusing on them as well. That's important. That's really key. Sometimes we get so worked up about our in-laws. All we do is just complain and complain and complain, even though some in-laws are, mashallah, amazing. I know they get a bad reputation sometimes, but carving out time for yourself and not obsessing over the actions of your in-laws, whether they have narcissistic personality related issues or other issues. Just acknowledging that those who are arrogant in their personality, have narcissistic tendencies, they try to stay in the spotlight. They try to get under your skin. They want to elicit a reaction from you. So staying calm within the chaos, building on other healthy relationships, and if you can't avoid that person, at least trying to help the spouse understand how the communication may be hurtful, or how the dynamic in the marriage has now changed as a result of the mother-in-law or the father-in-law's narcissistic tendencies, is really important. So that open communication is key.
Ahsanti, and that's so vital and important to understand how to set those boundaries again. And thank you so much for giving your insight on that. Last but not least, and this probably requires a whole show on itself, but how can we begin to wrap up here? Our last part is, how do we begin the work of healing the parts of you that seek the narcissistic validation? So this is probably somebody who's left the situation, but is probably still deeply hurt, triggered, and impacted. How do you begin the work and healing with that? Again, as therapists, we're going to say the process of therapy can help you, absolutely. What are your thoughts, sister, on this?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's very common for women in these situations to begin to select other men or gravitate towards other men, or vice versa, right, in their lives, to exhibit those same qualities. So if the self-work is not done, unfortunately, the cycle, there's a saying, what isn't repaired, what isn't repaired repeats itself, or something along those lines. I think it's a little bit catchier what I saw the other day, but what you don't repair, you repeat. That's it. What you don't repair, you repeat. So if you don't get help and pinpoint how this has impacted you, it's going to play out later in life, in your relationship with your spouse, your children, your friendships. So incredibly important to work on how this has impacted you. It impacts everyone in different ways, but some of the ways I see it impact my clients is, not having good interpersonal communication skills, struggling with anger, because for so long they had to hold in the anger. They were told they were too sensitive, they were too this and that, and so they learned to suppress it and not open up. So managing anger, managing emotions, regulating emotions in general, all of that is so important in the process. So there's just a few examples of what might need to be focused on in terms of recovery, but really how it affects everyone is different depending on their circumstances.
And the background where they came from, and how they were raised as children, and how their personality developed over time in relation to what is already nature versus nurture, that type of thing, right? And I think a lot of women and men too, perhaps, who've come out of unhealthy relationships, jump into another one without the self-healing and the self-work, like you said, to make up, or they see signs in the other person and say, oh, they're my soulmate, I found everything in you, and it's too good to be true. Guess what? It is too good to be true at first, right? So it's so important that before we even think about putting our souls and ourselves and our hearts into somebody else's energy, that we work on our own energy first. I think it's so important to recognize that. And to recognize that when you have been with a narcissist, or if you've been around people like that, that it's about them. It truly is about them. It's not about you. And I think this is where a lot of victims and survivors, it's a process before you move from victim to survivor. Being able to recognize that it was never about you. They fed upon your strengths and weaknesses, perhaps, and knew where to poke you. They study your personality. They're manipulative. They know how to get what they want from you. Doesn't matter how educated, how intelligent, wherever you are. Because sometimes people say, well, you're a therapist, or just people who've studied psychology. Oh, you have better chances at, you understand, you this and that. I've come across people who are highly, highly intelligent and end up in these types of situations. It's got nothing to do because you're not intelligent. It's got everything to do with the fact that they are highly manipulative. And this shows how good you are. The fact that you don't portray these characteristics. So it's really important to understand that for those who are moving out of the place of being a victim into a survivor, and with the self-healing, it was never about you. It was always about their negative traits. So important to understand that. Your final thoughts, sister?
I think you ended it beautifully, right?
Bless you, Habibti.
Honestly, mashallah, I've enjoyed this conversation today immensely, and the questions that have come in have
MashaAllah.
been fantastic. So I think on that note, yeah, you summarized it perfectly, that this is a journey that Allah's teaching you something through whenever you have to deal with somebody like this. And what's key here is learning how to grow from that experience, and especially with our kids, teaching our kids that as hard as this is, and as hard as we want to protect them from that kind of behavior, they are going to meet other people like that as they become older. So we're doing them a disservice by just trying to keep them in a bubble. And we need to have conversations with them ongoing about how to manage relationships like this, so that inshallah, when they're in the workplace, when they go to college, when they're entering new relationships, they know, they've been through it before. They have they actually gives them the upper hand, because they have a parent who's dealt with that. So they've had to prepare themselves for other situations that are similar. So it can actually be empowering when you use that negative experience and you channel it towards that higher purpose of self-actualizing as an individual and improving your future relationships.
Absolutely. Every experience, whether good or bad, is a lesson, is part of your journey, like you said, and inshallah will give you the life skills and the insights to help you in the future, but also others around you with your experiences. You don't necessarily have to go through it. Listen to other people's stories as well and their narrative to help you, inshallah. Thank you, my dear, dear sister, for your time, your energy, your insights. I know everybody has benefited who joined in in this program, and inshallah we can do other programs together. Some people have actually messaged me as we were speaking. They want to see us talk about PTSD. So that might be something interesting to explore in the future as well, inshallah. And anybody who is, and I should have mentioned this right from the beginning, that we have definitely been speaking about sensitive topics today. So if you are impacted, if you are triggered, if you are feeling it, of course, it's normal, it's natural. Please do reach out to your therapist. Please use, here in North America, we have the Nasiha helpline. In the UK, you have the Muslim Youth helpline that you can contact. These are free numbers to call. You can get support. And of course, if you are looking for a therapist, you can always contact Sister Anisa through her social media or on her website and ask for an appointment or a consult, at least to see if you're the right fit. And I highly recommend her. I've had wonderful feedback from people who have seen you, and I forgot to mention that to you, but somebody reached out and said, thank you for referring me to Sister Anisa. She's been helpful. Alhamdulillah wa shukr. And to encourage people, again, who are in these situations, to try and seek out the support to help you. You are worthy of so much more. You deserve so much more. You are Allah's creation and His light, and you deserve to be treated with respect and love. And again, this is not you. This is a projection of them. Thank you so much to Bronze Digitals as well for the beautiful posters that they always sponsor for our programs. Insta Ahl Bayt didn't quite work today on Instagram, but that's okay. Inshallah, I'm sure your husband will help us figure that out. He's so good at the technical stuff. And thank you so much again for everybody joining us. Thank you again, Sister Anisa. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.